If you want to have some feels and not be sure why, The OA is a Netflix series that you should check out. It's oddly captivating and certainly full of unexplained gaps that are ripe for the theorizing. If you haven't watched it yet, stop here and go get on Netflix because I will not hold back on spoilers. But if you have seen it and are kind of confused by it, this is the video for you. I'd like to start out by just figuring out what we're shown on the screen and trying to make sense of that. The series starts with a girl jumping off a bridge, and it turns out that she used to be blind, but now she can see, and she's been missing for the past 7 years. She was also adopted, originally born in Russia and known as Nina. Her parents died, and then she was adopted at elementary school age and renamed Prairie. Then, after she was captured, she began to identify as and demand to be called the OA, which we later find out means the original angel. Because OA had been through a near-death experience, or NDE, she was targeted and abducted by a researcher who was holding his subjects captive like animals and repeatedly killing them to try and find out where they went when they died. Now, the really strange thing is that we don't actually experience any of this firsthand, like we aren't viewing it as it's happening to OA. We are told this story after the fact as the OA talks about her missing years to a group of 5 people, and those 5 people are both insiders and outsiders of normal life. Okay, what do I mean by that? Because how can you be both? Well, in episode 8, we see that the group of 5 is definitely not a social clique at school, and they all fit into their own stereotypical groups. We have the teacher, the bully, the stoner, the choir geek, and the nerd. But all of them go much farther beyond that archetype. They don't really belong anywhere, and they're reaching out to find something that gives them more meaning in their difficult lives. So, through OA's story, the group of 5 is able to get out of their own way and essentially fill their souls and change their hearts by listening to what OA has survived. But throughout OA's story, we hear about extremely supernatural events, like figuring out 5 special movements to be able to do certain things. For instance, one of the movements was about healing a body and/or bringing it back to life, but we really don't know what the other movements were about, or even how the 5 captives were able to figure anything out by making random, often unsettling motions with their bodies. What we do know is that Hap, the captor/researcher, seemed to get very jealous of the OA and Homer's relationship, or maybe he just got mad at OA's condescending ego about the afterlife. But then Hap threw OA away after 7 years, claiming to know all of the movements himself and that he was going to complete the ritual and take everyone away without her. And that freedom must have been too much for OA because without even picking up a phone to call the police or her adoptive parents, OA jumps off a bridge and wakes up in a hospital room reclaimed by her family. Personally, I like to take what happens on the screen at face value unless I get a reason to believe otherwise. Or it's one of those movies that flat out tells you that they've been playing games, like the traumatic ending to Life of Pi, or the abrupt confession at the end of Atonement. So watching the OA, I want to fully believe that these experiences OA describes are true, but she gives us so many reasons to suspect that she's lying. First, I'd like to call attention to her actions again. If you had been imprisoned and tortured for 7 years, even if you have the mentality of a captive or Stockholm Syndrome or whatever else, OA makes the assumption that the other 4 prisoners will actively cooperate with Hap when he demands to be the 5th member. Does she think that all 4 of them are just going to go and do the movements on cue just because Hap says so? If OA's account of the situation is truthful, I cannot see that being the case. All of the captives hate Hap. They've all tried to escape when given the chance, and they've all fought back as much as possible from anything that Hap wants them to do. They demand answers, they say things to jar him, they even decide to do the movements wrong when Hap tries to force Homer and OA to heal the officer's wife. So when Hap shows up again without OA, the others aren't going to say, "Okay, boss, let's get going on our movement dance together." The captives hate him, and they certainly won't give him the benefit of going with them on their escape. At the very least, they will argue, refuse, and hold out for as long as they can. And OA should know this, so why doesn't she try something to help her friend's entrapment instead of jumping off a bridge hoping to meet them on the other side? And for that matter, the movements themselves are ridiculous. Now, sure, supernatural stuff can and should be way different from what we perceive as normal. I'm 1000% on board with that part. But I just struggle to buy that out of all the motions that the human body can make, they figured out the proper combination of random movements to bring someone back from the dead after 11 hours. Why wasn't OA told about the moves and which ones to make when she was on the other side before? I mean, they say that they get amnesia when they travel over there, but that seems to be really selective amnesia that happens when it's convenient to the story and doesn't when it's more convenient to the story. Because she remembers going to the other side as a child, she remembers going back to eat the dove, she remembers so many things about crossing over. Even the hippie said he came back and he knew that he was one of the movements now, and that they needed 5 of them to complete it. Yet any other time that they've been killed, they say, oh, we can't remember anything that happens when we go over there. It's inconsistent. And I mean, we're basically told that she's just trying things out and hoping something worked. So how did OA know that the movements weren't a combination of words and sounds or even using other objects too? Maybe it's a blood sacrifice that leads them to another dimension. Nothing but motion ever gets explored. And what about the whole part of them traveling to the rings of Saturn and that's what the other side is? Nothing about any of that ever came close to coming together in a sensible way. Also, as OA's story progresses, her portrayal of Homer seems to get more romanticized and less accurate. Like, we know OA was a captive for 7 years, but we have no idea how long the others have been trapped. With the way that everyone else seems to have coped with their own entrapment, it implies to me that everyone else has been there for at least several months, if not years. So OA introduces Homer as a man completely desperate to get word out to his son that he didn't abandon him, which would tell me that that has been the top priority on his mind for as long as he's been a captive. But it doesn't take long on screen before Homer gives up and doesn't talk about his son again. Homer doesn't even try to make a call when at the hotel with Hap. And when Homer runs away from the hotel, Hap somehow gets in front of him to block him off, which is physically impossible if you plan out the logistics of that scene in your head. Because Hap was up in the hotel, Homer should have been long gone before he could ever figure out where he went. It's also very troublesome that French uncovers some books hidden under the OA's bed. She has a book on angels and near-death experiences, which of course she has been talking about like crazy, but hey, maybe she just wants to research what she's been through. But then she also had 2 very specific titles, The Iliad by Homer and The Oligarch, which is a book about men of power in Russia around the 1990s. It's not the most recognizable title, but it is about the same type of people that OA described her biological father to be like. So with those 4 books, we basically can find the foundation for everything that OA has told the group of 5. Then we have the completed movement at the end of episode 8, which was done as a complete roll of the dice against an armed shooter. Sure, the shooter gets stopped because of their movements, but 5 people stood up and started flash mobbing during a serious crisis. I'm pretty sure anyone would have stopped what they were doing to stare at them. I know if I had been the active shooter, I would probably be wondering why they weren't taking this seriously. And that would have caught me very off guard, I imagine. I have not shot up any place and I do not intend to. This is just more theoretical speculation. Don't call the FBI. Now, the shooter does hit OA and she's carted off in an ambulance, calling out to her friends that they did it and she can feel it. It's implied that OA dies and she goes from a black screen to an all-white room where she says, Homer, as a question, and the series ends, or at least the season. There will hopefully be a season 2 to explain more in the future, but if it doesn't do well, we might not get it. So this season 1 could be the end of the series. We don't know yet. Finally, I think the nail in the coffin is OA's scars. We never get a good look at them, but we see hints that they are all around her shoulder blades on her back. Do me a favor, take one hand and try to touch the bottom of your shoulder blade, the side that's nearest to your spine. Can you touch it with either hand? Because I can't. I'm assuming no one else can either. So do you think you could carve detailed images into that area of your body on your own? No. And since OA had no one else there to make these marks for her, that means that her wounds were not self-inflicted. Now, I know some could say that she did regularly come in contact with Hap, but the captives did not want Hap to know what they were doing. They knew he was watching, but they were refusing to tell him anything specific about their discoveries, which means OA would never have let Hap give her those scars, or at least not for the intention she's telling us. What sticks with me most is when the OA went with her family to the Olive Garden, and that girl came up and took a photo. Then she said how brave OA was for surviving the ordeal, specifically mentioning rape. Yet, OA never talks about being in any sexually exploitative situations. I believe she even mentions being a virgin at one point in the series. So why would this girl say something that's such an intimate detail that she would know nothing about? Well, maybe that's because the media has gotten a hold of a few things that even OA herself is not willing to share with us yet. Remember, this series is her story from her perspective. Most of it is coming right out of her mouth. We're not there, we're not experiencing it. It's all secondhand. I think the OA was held captive and sexually abused for many years, and she was probably locked in a room or a basement, and there was no research. But she felt like her captor was killing her repeatedly, maybe from severe physical abuse. And OA suffered so badly and for so long that she invented a nicer story for herself that allowed her mind to have some kind of peace in the situation. Now, I think it's really important to question whether or not the OA was ever really blind. After all, the books that French finds appear to be in normal text and not in Braille, so she either just got those books or she had regular books in her room all this time. So does that mean she was faking the entire time? I think the answer is a very complicated yes and no. But this video is already over 12 minutes long, so I think we're going to stop here today with the questions, and I'll do another video later to explain what I think is going on with OA's blindness. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed enough to like, subscribe, and share this video. I've also got a lot of other videos on my channel that you are fully encouraged to go check out. Plus, you can find me on Facebook at Say Halo Goodbye, which is my gamer tag, or Twitter at _Fanily.